guess in Trinidad, things are just different, okay? So in Trinidad, I lived at home. I had, obviously, my mom and my 3 sisters, and my dad was there. But the crazy thing about it is that he had his own wife and kids, right? So he had his own home. And as a kid, I remember seeing him all the time, which as an adult, I'm like, how the heck did you do that, right? And this was just normal, I guess, right? Like, this was normal. So that's kind of what I saw growing up at an early age. And I remember in Trinidad just always being by myself, right? Like, I was always alone. I remember going to the beach, but I just remember sitting like on the sand by myself. I remember birthday parties, sitting by myself. Like, I was always alone. I don't understand why, but it is what it is. But when I was 8, my mom told me we were going to Venezuela, okay? And Venezuela from Trinidad is just a hop, skip, and jump, probably like an hour flight. We were on the plane for a whole bunch of hours, and we stepped out of the plane, and Venezuela was freezing cold, man. Like, it was crazy. It was October 30th, and I realized we jumped into Canada, okay? So when you're told you're going to Venezuela and you end up in Canada, you're like, what the heck? And then the next day, I thought Canadians were crazy because it was Halloween. And all these kids are dressed like zombies coming to my house, right? So I was like, what the heck's going on? Like, what did you do? Like, this is crazy. This is not what I signed up for. But anyways, my mom had decided she didn't want to be in that situation anymore. She didn't want to be the other woman. So she decided she's got to make a better life for herself. So she actually, my stepdad, who wanted to marry her like years before, like 30 years before, and she said no because she was in this crazy situation, right? But she changed it, and my sisters followed, everybody followed, and it was good, right? Like, we came here, I had a father figure, it was cool, but it still wasn't, something wasn't right, you know what I mean? Like, I struggled with a lot of things because I didn't understand. I remember when I was 13, I went to Trinidad, and all I wanted to do was see my dad, right? Like, that's it. The whole summer, I'm like, I gotta see my dad, I gotta see my dad. And my uncle's like, yeah, don't worry, we'll see him. And then eventually, like a week before I left, they're like, well, your dad doesn't want to see you. I'm like, what the heck, man? I'm like, what did I do? Like, because at the time, like, I knew my dad was talking to my sisters, I knew he had a relationship, that he was talking to my mom, but he wasn't talking to me. I'm like, what did I do? Like, I was 13, right? So that just frustrated me. And for the next 20 years, I was angry, man. Like, I was angry. And I grew up Catholic, so I knew about God, but I didn't have a relationship with God. And I remember Jen and I, we started dating. She's my wife. We started dating in high school. And in my early 20s, I remember just having an argument with her about God. And I said, you know, I don't understand your God, because if your God was real, he wouldn't put all this hurt on people. If your God, and we got into a huge argument. And I'm surprised we didn't actually break up at the time, because she was so offended, but I was so angry, right? I was so angry. And, you know, fast forward to the point where I actually just got to the point where I was just depressed, right? Just severely depressed. And I remember we were going to a trip in, I think we went to Barrie Cottage, right? We're on the water, it's beautiful, the sun's come down. And I'm sitting there, and the kids are playing in the water, and Jen and I are just sitting there, and I just can't enjoy it, right? Like, I'm just like a zombie. And Jen's like, are you depressed? I'm like, no, I'm not depressed. I'm not depressed, no. And then she's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. So I decided to open up my phone and look at the signs of depression. I was like, holy crap, man, this is crazy. I said, Jen, check this out. So I showed it to her, and then she said, you know what are you gonna do about it? I said, I'm gonna go talk to the doctor. So I went to talk to the doctor on Monday. Actually, it was Tuesday, it was a holiday. And at that point, they were like really calm and talking to me softly, and, sir, are you okay? Like, is everything good? I didn't find out until the second visit that based on the level of depression I had, I was on suicide watch, is what they would say, okay? But I went through that whole process over probably about 6 months. I started taking medication for my depression. I actually have ADD, and for those who have ADD, you realize that ADD sometimes leads to depression, which leads to ADD, like it's just a cycle. So I decided that I couldn't stay on depression medication I gotta fix the symptom, the actual problem, which is ADD. So I started taking medication for that. Things started working great. And I told Jen, I said, you know what? At the time I was running a business, and I was like, you know what, this is, I just gotta go back to work. I just gotta, just focus and go back to work. So I started working at Ferrero of all places. And I just wanted to, just get back to normal, right? I just wanted to have normalcy in my life. So I started working at Ferrero in the factory. I was working 3 shifts. And things were great, okay? Except that I was working 3 shifts, so I was a zombie all the time. And during that time, Jen and I were drifting further and further and further apart, right? And I remember going to, the first time I met Mike actually was at this Christian, it wasn't even a Christian event, but it was just an event for men, and there was steak, and it was at Arnie Small's house, actually. I don't know, where's Arnie? He's gone. Oh, he's gone. So it was at Arnie Small's house, and I remember saying to Jen, 2 days before that event, I'm like, I just wish that I could find some Christian guys I could hang out with, that I can have a relationship, that you can have a real talk with, just do life with, right? And she's like, maybe you'll find somebody at that event. I'm like, yeah, I hope so. So I met Mike, and it wasn't meant to be, because I didn't really connect with anybody there. I connected with Mike, but I really didn't connect with anybody there. And, kept going with this Ferrero thing, and I just, things just got worse and worse and worse in my family life, to the point where I actually went outside of my marriage, right? And it was one of the craziest decisions I made, because I remember at the time thinking, man, I'm no better than my dad. There's nothing I can do better than him. And this is just my life. And the funny thing that happened after that is a couple months later, I was playing basketball with Ray and my son. And it was a Sunday, and I had to go to work the next day. And we were playing basketball. And I was just playing basketball 21, we're having fun, we're just shooting and doing all that stuff. But all of a sudden, I wake up the next day and I cannot lift my arm. I can't lift my arm. And I'm like, what the heck? I just turned 40, but come on. This is not that bad. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna call in sick today, because I actually had a physical the next day. So I'm just gonna go to the doctor's office, and then, I'll just figure it out. And the whole time, I'm stretching it, trying to make it. Meanwhile, I'm making it worse. I didn't know that. So I went to see my doctor, and he said, he's like, yeah, you probably just tweak something. It's fine, you'll be fine. I'm like, okay. He's like, just check it out by the end of the week. I'll send you for x-rays and all that stuff, ultrasounds. So I went there, and it wasn't bad, but apparently I was off work for a year, okay, with this crazy thing. But what's amazing, and I realized that God's always working even before you realize He's working. Because in that year, I started back in the business, because my mind was starting to get better. Because I was not going to work, I didn't have time to gallivant around the city. So I was at home, trying to focus on certain things. And I remember going to a networking event, and I met my friend Fausto. But I said, Fausto, I know you. And if I talk to you right now, I'm not going to meet anybody else. Okay, so I'm going to call you next week, and I'm going to have lunch with you, but for now, I'm going to meet other people. He's like, perfect, brother. So, ended up, having a great time at the event. Next week, as promised, I called Fausto, went to his office. We spent 3 hours talking about business. But it was more, we were talking about, just faith, right? It was the weirdest conversation, because I never had that before. And then Fausto said, hey, man, I meet with this group, is it Thursdays? I meet with this group every Thursday. It's Christian business leaders. Would you be interested? I'm like, yeah, that sounds cool. So I went home and told Jen, and she's like, cool. So started attending that, met some great guys. And then we started going through 40 Days of Purpose-Driven Life. And one of the chapters that just blew my mind was a chapter about having a relationship with God. Because I was like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, you can't have a relationship with God. I remember talking to Mike about it, and they're like, yeah, that's what you want. So journeying along, and trying to develop a relationship with God. And then at one point, I actually had, I was telling my friend Ricardo, I said, man, I don't know what's wrong with it. Like, my marriage, I don't know how to fix it. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's just, I'm trying to fix it, but I don't know what to do. He's like, have you ever heard about the triangle? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, well, if you want to get closer to your spouse, you have to get closer to God, right? He's like, it's like a triangle, right? So the further you are away from God, the further you are from your spouse, right? You need to be closer to God, and then that will naturally bring you. I said, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I said, Jen's close to God, but I'm not, so we're probably both like this, right? And he's like, yeah. So he's like, I said, so all I got to do is just get closer to God. That's it. He's like, yep. I'm like, you're telling me if I do that, that's going to fix my marriage? He's like, yep. I said, I can do that. So I went home that day, and I said to Jen, I said, hey, Ricardo told me the craziest thing. She's like, what's that? I said, in order for me to fix our marriage, I have to get closer to God. It's like a triangle. So I'm showing her the thing. And then she starts crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, well, and then she starts crying again. I'm like, well, what's wrong? She's like, well, as soon as you said that, in my mind I said, it's not that easy. And then I heard God tell me, yes, it is. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy, right? Like, God can talk to you. That's what I was thinking in that moment. God can talk to you. But that kind of happened. And then right after that, like a few weeks later, Mike invited me, the band of brothers, we have an annual river run. And Mike invited me to the river run. And on that river run, there was a number of gentlemen that spoke. But one person that spoke was Dave. And I remember hearing Dave's story, and as Dave is speaking, I'm like, holy crap. Like, God's able to work for him. Like, if he can work for him, like, surely he can do something in my life, right? And at the end of that day, we were given a stone and a stick, right? And the stone was a new name that you would be given. And the stick was all of your sins. And all you had to do was throw the stick in the fire, giving it to God. And I couldn't do it because I'm thinking of all the sins that I committed. I'm like, it can't be that easy. And all these guys are throwing their sticks in the thing. I'm like, man, these guys are not sinners. Like, what the heck's going on? Because they're just not even thinking about it. But for me, I started crying, like literally, I'm bawling. I can't bring myself to putting the stick in the fire. And in that moment, I felt somebody touch me, and I heard, I can take it. Well, that just put me over the top, right? I just couldn't, I was just crying with all these men here. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? Eventually, I threw the stick in the fire. And that was really, I said, Mike, I gotta talk to you, man, because I don't know what to do. Like, this is crazy. And the next week, I met with Mike, and we were talking at Tim Hortons, and he said, I said, Mike, what are you talking, like this whole stone thing, like, give it a name, what's that name? And Mike says to me, well, usually God gives you a name. It could be like Nathaniel. I'm like, that's the name. He's like, what do you mean? I said, that's the name that I was told. Like, that's the name that I heard when you were telling this story. And he's like, oh. So when we looked it up, Mike looked it up. Nathaniel was gift of God. And Mike's like, man, God's got a plan for you. He's like, have you ever given your life to Christ? I'm like, no. So Mike's like, well, do you want to do it now? I'm like, sure. So we had that conversation. So I gave my life to Christ at Tim Hortons, right? But that really, like, those series of events led up to something that was really crazy in my life because, like, Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a couple of years ago, Jen found out, and that I stepped outside of our marriage, and we were like, okay, we're going to separate. And I remember leaving the house, just devastated, because I'm like, man, like this mistake I made all this time ago, and I've been trying to change, but it is what it is, right? And I remember in that moment, I'm like, I don't know what to do. I got nobody to call. I got no friends. Like, who can I share this with? So I called Mike. I said, Mike, this is what happened. Told him the truth. Mike's like, okay, there's a band of brothers meeting tonight. Just come. I said, okay. So after the meeting, Mike and I prayed. He's like, we're just gonna pray. We're gonna pray. And God's gonna give you a word. I'm like, okay, whatever you say. So we prayed. I heard nothing. We prayed. I heard nothing. Mike's like, it's okay. We're just gonna keep doing this until you get something. And then finally I heard, just love your wife. So I told Mike, and he's like, oh, that's all you gotta do, just love your wife. That's it? He's like, yeah. I said, okay, I'm gonna do that. So I was living at my sister's house for a couple of days, and Mike invited me to New Life. And I told Jeff, I said, hey, like, Mike invited me to New Life, it's a church, like, I would love to go, I'm going, I'd love to take the kids. She's like, yeah. I said, would you like to go? She's like, no. I said, okay, do you mind just dropping the kids off? I said, she's like, yep. So then I come to church Sunday, so the first Sunday we ever came to church. Get here, and Jen's dressed. I'm like, you're coming to church? She's like, yeah. She said, I don't want to. I said, well, why are you coming? She's like, well, because God told me I have to come to church. I said, oh. I said, well, what was that like? She's like, well, God said, you're coming to church. I said, no, I'm not. He said, yes, you are. I said, no, I'm not. He said, yes, you are. I said, no, I'm not. He said, go get dressed. I said, fine. And that's how Jen ended up in church. But what was crazy, man, the first time we came to church, I remember seeing Mark, right? And I'm like, this dude looks so cool. I'm like, oh man, this guy looks cool. There's some cool guys here. Like, these guys look like normal guys, right? This is different. And I'm like, looking at Mark during worship, and he's got his hand raised. I'm like, oh, look at this guy go, man. This guy's good. I like it. This is good. I can get into this. And then I'm like, oh, this guy's going up. I'm like, wow, he does announcements and stuff. This is cool. And I'm like, whoa, that guy's a preacher. I love this place. But I remember the first worship song I played was Come to the Altar. And like, I don't know if you guys know the lyrics to that song, but it's, are you broken and hurting within, overwhelmed by the weight of your sins? I started crying, man. Like in church, like crying. There was so much tears shed for Jen and I. After service, Mark prayed over us for what seemed like forever. And it just something felt different in that moment for both of us. We actually went home together. We went back to our place. And we spent the whole afternoon just talking, just trying to figure stuff out. Like, how are we going to get through this? Like, what are we going to do? So I lived with my sister for about another week or so, and then, went back home. We started attending church regularly. One of the first series I heard from Mark was Giving God the Wheel, right? And so during that sort of series, I said, okay, God, I know the results I've gotten in 40 years of life on my own. I'm going to give you 1 year. I'll do whatever you want for a year, and let's see what you can do, okay? Now, as I say that, it sounds crazy to me to challenge God like that, right? Like, I probably wouldn't do that today, but I did it. And in that year, Jen and I got baptized in the river by Mark and Josh. We renewed our wedding vows on our 15-year anniversary. My daughter gave her life to Christ. I got an amazing job, like an incredible job that I still have. Jen now works for that company. And since then, my other daughter has given her life to Christ. I have the best friendships like I could ever have. So many amazing people. And it's just I had one guy, just a group of guys who were willing to just journey with me. So it's been an incredible life since coming to God. And honestly, just thank you for letting me to share my story.